What's up, I'm Ryan. I wanted to make a video today about Margiela Spring 2026 runway show. With I guess some like insider insights since I was able to attend the show in Paris this season, which was really exciting. It was a huge honor, and also it was my birthday. What a great birthday gift, amazing. I do want to kind of just jump right into it though. So Margiela Spring 2026 was Glenn Martin's co-ed ready-to-wear debut collection at the House of Margiela. Glenn Martin's is succeeding John Galliano at the house as the first creative director other than Martin Margiela, who is the originator of the fashion house, as creative director. Glenn Martin's is most known for his work at Y Project and Diesel. Okay, so I went to the Margiela show. As you can see, this is the recorder. This was like a part of the invitation. I actually had a huge issue trying to get this because I didn't know where I was going to stay or if I was even going to go. I picked it up right before I flew out. I think it was the day that I flew out. I picked it up from Margiela's offices. Okay, so in terms of the setting, I'll set you up. So the runway show was at ss26, I'm not French, a cultural center, and it's the place that Margiela held his final runway show at his fashion house. I walked in and I saw the orchestra set up, and I expected them to establish a really serious tone just because of the stark white walls and fact that there would be an orchestra. So I was maybe anticipating some haunting, moody lighting or a tone to the collection, like ripped to shreds gowns that would trail on the floor or something to kind of offset that bright white set and create contrast. I was personally sat directly next to the camera operator. I had nobody to the left of me. I consider that first and a half row. I take filming runway shows really seriously. But yeah, I was sat directly next to the camera operator, and as we neared the start of the show, he turned the camera from facing forward. It was facing the same direction we were sat, and then he turned it behind us. Why would it be so important to capture the orchestra? Something incredible is probably gonna happen. Gag, of course, it was children, it was a children's orchestra. People asked online how come the attendees at the runway show in the videos don't seem happy that the children are coming out. I think people forget that it was a complete surprise, and it was very, very shocking to see children or to know that anybody was going to be coming at all. And people were very happy, and people smiled and laughed and cheered them on. You can hear Mel Ottenberg from Interview Mag's voice in a lot of the clips because he was cheering them on and they started smiling when he was cheering. The children are from Orchestra à l'École. You guys, I'm not French, pray for me. Help me with the French association. So disorienting, but we all immediately understood that it was them paying homage to Margiela's Spring 1990 runway show.
The kids started walking with the models because they loved it so much, and everybody made it happen.
So just to break down the reference about the Spring 1990 show, it was his third show after debuting in 1989, the year before. He held the show in the 10 arrondissement. I'm sorry if I don't say this right. That he held the show in the 10th. He had elementary school students from the neighborhood draw and design the invites for the show. Bespoke, unique, and original handmade invites, and they're in line with Jenny Marin's vision for the brand's invites, which is also from Nyla Mitchell's Rage and Racks newsletter. The show was extremely historic and memorable because it undermined the conventions of the industry, which was kind of the House of Margiela's MO. It was not about exclusivity. It was a very unique way of staging a runway show. Babies were front row. People in the neighborhood wanted to look. The children wanted to get sat themselves, so it was like finders keepers, losers weepers. You move your feet, you lose your seat vibes. It was very cute. You can kind of see the high energy and intensity of the show. It doesn't seem like a perfectly staged show where like models choreographed, stomped down a white runway with the flashing lights and everything is typical. There are like interruptions, technical issues, difficulties. You're kind of crowded by children. There's a lot of energy and life, onlookers. People from the neighborhood obviously wanted to join. Because it's their community, they want to know what's going on. But I think that instead of creating a stuffy, exclusive, traditional vision of glamour and fashion excitement, they created a new vision that was rooted in like excitement and dismantling hierarchy and kind of interrogating and questioning the fashion system as it exists currently. Hierarchy dismantled, the inherited path being disrupted, right? Conformity gone. They set forth a new path instead. In terms of like theory or contemplating what this all means, to me, introducing children feels like a play on Maison Margiela's ability to transcend time. A lot of what the fashion house does involves thinking about time and undermining time, rewriting time. One of my favorite references that they make to time is not just the aging and mold and decay on clothes or the patina on clothes, or the painting of white until it crackles off and things like this, but I really love the watch without a face, because I know it seems really literal, but I think it's an actually really subtle, when it's done in real life, way of representing like questioning our relationship with time and the direction of time, especially as it relates to fashion and the fashion system. So when you see the orchestra, especially in the context of a high fashion runway show, and you're thinking about all the expertise and tenure in the room, right, and the time spent dedicated to refining one's craft, all these things come to mind in my experience, in my opinion. And I think having kids there upends that expectation and reminds us of the value of naivete, being newly welcomed to the world, youth, and also the fact that this is his ready-to-wear debut. So he's a baby himself. Glenn Martin's is a baby himself. Spread the word. Glenn Martin's secret baby. Also, I think it positions us to consider our relationship with time as the wearer or audience, how they've grown up loving fashion, etc., etc. I think it also reminds you of your own childhood. If you can see, this is the invitation to the show. It's a recorder. Sorry, it's super loud, and I'm really not good at it. I was actually like a really good clarinet player, but I am not good at recorder. I know I could be better at clarinet than this. But yeah, I mean, this is something that people grow up using to learn and be introduced to music and reading sheet music and having like finger dexterity. So it reminds you of childhood completely. They juxtapose visions of design and context. They layer different meanings. When you see the kids come in and disrupt that energy in the room of everybody attending traditional shows before this, you can sense that same spirit of the house working to challenge conformity and valuing youth and imperfection and kind of confronting tradition and structure. And I think that is the root and basis of the House of Margiela. I was reading Dress, Body, and Culture contribution from Michael Carter. I think it's Fashion Classics from Carlyle to Barthes. But what it says is clothes arise because essentially prohibitions are placed upon the pleasures the infant gains from their body. So children have to get clothed essentially because, you know, when you're exposed to the outside world, it can be painful. And so even though it's your natural inclination and you are born naked, the rest is drag. Clock that. I'm just kidding. Yeah, it has adverse effects essentially if you are not protected. So they also say once the infant enters culture, modesty arises. And it's like, yeah, that modesty is just like being clothed. They're vulnerable to the outside world. The reading talked about the general understanding of why clothes are used across different axes throughout history. The general three expectations are people wear clothes for decoration, for modesty, or for protection. And I think that Margiela as a house does a lot to work with that idea, which I'm going to get into. I also obviously was led to think about abstraction and representation and like the origins of representing dressing symbols, which sounds like a lot of convoluted words, which clock that as well. Sometimes it is. But I was reading about abstraction in the changing boundaries and nature of modern art world by Richard Kalina. I've been getting a lot of art books lately. And they talk about how abstraction is drawn from and opposed to representation, right? So something is represented. So you have the supposed original symbol, and then it can be changed. And so you need the original symbol in order to adapt it, right? It's written in 1994. And they talk about how art at the time was neither traditionally abstract nor traditionally realistic. They talk about how abstract artists considered their work to be perfectly real, meaning like when they are painting an abstract form of a landscape, to them, that is them establishing what is real, even though that's not the way that you see it literally. They have a quote that says, "Painting stands in a metaphorical relation to reality, but its distillation of and discursion on it. That which is deemed reality by abstract artists varies widely." And there's an interesting part of that because they talk about how abstract artists have such broad variations in how they depict the same subject, but there's still commonalities, and then there's still a sense of formality to it. Like there are things that are subordinated throughout the works. All of these different abstract painters, they all saw their realities as untrue in a deeper sense, and so that's why they're or part of what contributes to the way that they see their work, right? If their reality is untrue, then when you're saying that this is an abstraction of reality, to them, this is them actually establishing reality. And I think Martin himself similarly saw beauty in reality and like beauty in the ways that women get dressed and the real things that women bring to life, but also this obsession with dolls and anonymity and the artificial and plastic and things like this. I think that made him see the fashion system as untrue and maybe even grotesque. And I think he sought to represent an abstraction of that system For example, like investigating the ways that women get dressed every day and how they adapt their own clothing and build relationships with shopping, and then they manifest that into garments. So I think the ways that they represent that at the House of Margiela are through trompe-l'oeil, inversion, deconstruction, repurposing of garments to look like different garments, like the way that they'll flip over a camisole to look like a garter and things like this, like replicating the effectively designed pieces that have already existed in fashion, etc., etc. I think it's their way of kind of representing that. I think the House of Margiela is operating in terms of introducing the original representation or original symbol and the abstraction at once, and then positioning you to kind of question the original symbol and align with the abstraction. Abstract expressionists in this book and in this reading are described as creating or establishing the condition of reality, not merely depicting it. And I think the more grotesque work from Margiela effectively does this, as do the exaggerated features like gigantic shoulders on blazers, or again the trompe-l'oeil, or using dress forms as outerwear. I think in this way Martin establishes his vision of reality as conflicting, contradictory, absurd, and he establishes that it's impossible to disconnect the design process and function of clothes in culture, even if you don't literally see that. I think that's his way of establishing that what he sees in reality is ultimately untrue, and so what he's establishing through his design work is that abstraction, but that's like how he tells the truth. Okay, so that's just a POV. Okay, so something that immediately stood out to everyone, I think, 4-stitch logo mouth guard. This like immediately captured everybody. This was everybody's Instagram post as soon as it came down the runway. 4-stitch logo mouth guards. Immediately as the show starts, that's the immediate thing that you're confronted with. These metal orthodontic structures in the shape of Margiela's 4-stitch signature logo. He would create the absence of a logo and instead have this signature 4 stitches so that you knew it was Margiela, but also the 4 stitches are loosely basted, so the expectation is that they'll come off anyway. So when I was growing up, I actually had a huge amount of orthodontics to the point that I almost had a headgear. So I actually loved seeing it because I'm like, yes, reclaim that. So if you're not familiar, Margiela was never really one for logos or the traditions of the fashion industry. One of the things he's known for in the fashion world, and I think Women's Wear Daily has some articles about it, and I can talk about it later, but it's kind of rejecting the traditional fashion system and all aspects of it, especially like luxury fashion. When you enter a department store as a new designer, they want to have your stuff displayed in a way that will, have full sell-through, and they want people to be attracted to it, especially at the time that they were debuting at the House of Margiela in the 80s. And in the early 90s when they were going to department stores, they want you to be like, this is the Margiela collection, this is designer, this is the new hot thing, you want to buy it. And he was like, no. And he didn't want to display it the way that the department stores wanted him to. He didn't want to bend to anything they wanted. He was like, I want it my way. And they were like, we're not going to sell it then. And he was like, but I want it my way. Perhaps it's about forcing everybody with the 4-pronged mouth stretchers into looking shocked or smiley, like everyone has the exact same reaction. I think it was about uniformity, and I think it was connected to the orchestra and this idea of orchestrating the ways that people react to things and orchestrating the way that people show up in the world and kind of forcing people into maybe a smile, maybe a grimace, maybe both at the same time, and maybe the ambiguity of both. Oh my God, even though everybody's teeth are shaped differently, it actually did look different on each model, but maybe the goal was to create this sense of uniformity, and that's the anonymity, like you're all the same because you all have that same exact expression. It can maybe be a commentary on how we respond to or talk about fashion. Like we're all orchestrated to have identical responses, or even in our roles, we're expected to come away from runway shows with a positive view of the show no matter what, like one band, one sound, drumline vibes. Like, does that make sense? Based on the instructors, right? Or those who hold power, which would be the fashion system, which the House of Margiela is always challenging or interrogating, right? And that's maybe why they had the orchestra, because that's the conductor, the maestro, telling us what to feel, what to say, and what to think, and we're all aligning. So that's why they have this orchestra, and you're being orchestrated to have the same exact reactions. So they play the music, and everybody comes down the line smiling, like you're supposed to, as you were instructed to by the instructor. Do you know what I mean? The conductor. I was reading Flugel on modesty, and it says, decoration or the aesthetic taste will, as it develops, tend to become reconciled more and more to the natural human form and seeks to set off and reveal its beauties rather than hide its deficiencies, or to substitute other beauties of a kind that are foreign to anatomy. Complete reconciliation with the body would mean that the aesthetic variations, emendations, and aggrandizements would no longer be felt necessary or desirable. Okay, one position is that this could be about anonymity, and this 4-stitch mouthguard logo could be trying to symbolize or connect the idea of anonymity at the house to their audience. From the house's perspective and POV on their website, it says that this collection is an exploration of anonymity. Margiela, the man, and the fashion house are both known for their emphasis on anonymity, conveyed through masks covering the faces of the models on the runway, long bangs that obscure the identities of models on the runway, no designer wave at the end of runway shows, or the entire atelier in lab coats, which are like a uniform. Use a lot of reflection, positioning the viewer to focus on the self, and a part of this is the logo. So rather than placing designer logos in his work, Margiela was known for his signature of applying a subtle 4 loose base stitches, and I think that this hugely upends fashion tradition. In terms of anonymity, I was wondering, is this a new form of Margiela's signature masking because it distracts from each model's individuality? Maybe is an attempt to get people to focus on that 4-stitch logo and like the idea of Margiela over anything else. Is it reminding the audience of the 4-stitch signature, which is meant to fall off, rather than using logos or producing clothes with logos? Like, is it anonymity because it reminds you, like, and then the 4-stitch logo falls off anyway, and then, you know what I mean? It could be the exact opposite though. You know, could it be a challenge to the idea of anonymity created at the house? Because I think it could also be an attempt to draw attention to each model's humanity and the organic aspect of this, right? Fashion can be seen as a tool of alienating people from their own bodies, which is what Patrizia Calefato says. And I think that this is a way of like returning people to individuality and people's sense of authorship in their own body. Patrizia Calefato suggests that when you're forced essentially to dress in uniforms, for example, or you're forced into being shown socially controlled images, it induces self-alienation. For example, like when we're forced into small boxes in order to align with the objectives of those in power, for example, when you wear a uniform to work, you get distanced from your true self and your true sense of self because you're losing your sense of subjectivity. You're forgetting your own ability to have a perspective, have an opinion. What do I think? It's not about I, it's about us. We're all this operation. We are all this machine. We all have a shared goal. It's a really great way of manipulating people into not standing up for what's right, to be honest. It's a really good way to force people to, or position people to not make decisions that they would normally make. Do you know what I mean? You don't remember that you're a person, so you're more easily controlled as an object to do someone in power's bidding when you lose that sense of subjectivity in terms of like being able to dress yourself. That's part of why they instill uniforms at schools or dress codes at schools. They say it won't distract people, or because it will create it won't create hierarchy, but it's also a way of like creating order in a place because you're like, I'm a part of this school, you know? That's not what this school would do. That's not a way of representing this school. Instead of remembering that you're a person independent of the school, and after you leave the school, you'll still be a person, you're like thinking in terms of the objects. So it's subjectivity versus anonymity, or both at once. They all look like torture devices. So I was very happy to see this on the runway because I hated that. Because of my seat, perhaps, I could see into their mouths and like almost down their esophagus. Esophagi, plural for esophagus, comment in the chat. It kind of made me think about how you can't really escape that models are people. They're not mannequins and they're not dress forms to drape on. They're human beings with voices, with saliva, with comfort levels, with air going through their lungs. Because I remember when I first saw them come down the runway, you know my first thought? How'd they get them on? Like, did the models' dressers have to put it in their mouth for them, or were they handed to them? Are they custom fitted to each model? How soon before they start walking do they put them in? When they go in the back before they have to walk again, do they take it out or they keep it in? Does it hurt? What do they think as they're walking? Are they worried about it falling out? What if it falls out? Do they have to readjust their grip in their mouth so that it doesn't fall out? Like, these are the questions that you can only pose about a real human and about real, like, sensory receptors and feelings. Like, you're thinking about their nerve endings. It reminds me of when I was posting about how Thomas Maldonado said that scientists were working to artificialize human touch, but when they would work to develop skin with the purpose of like feeling things, it wasn't coming anywhere near the capabilities of a human finger's skin, because the performance of automated tools can't yet replicate humanity, which reminds me of like an AI part of this. So in The Clothed Body, Patrizia Calefato says, the hat is a choice of spirit, a conscious sign, an emblem of transformation, and exposes you to the gaze of others. Meaning, it involves this exchange between human and object to create this life and animacy between them. I think that's connected to the House of Margiela's mannequins on the runway having the people from the atelier hold flat garments. Marcel Margiela's obsession with dolls and reality versus fiction. Patrizia Calefato also says a garment can also cage the body, condemning it to the forced task of representing a social role, position, or hierarchy, which is again tied to what I said about uniforms and uniformity. So like school, military, prison, etc. Think about why they want these people to wear uniforms in order to create the sense of control. And maybe it's the exact opposite. Maybe showing teeth means featuring such a unique, distinct signifier, because teeth and dental records are used to like identify bodies and signify uniqueness, and that's how you know like who someone is. People have all these, complaints about people getting veneers and, nobody's teeth look unique anymore. Maybe the teeth being shown, they are again a way of reestablishing this idea of the organic, because it reminds us of what makes us distinct, and how anonymity in fashion and using models as like walking hangers can be dehumanizing. Maybe it's about rehumanizing. Maybe it's about rehumanizing. My mind, I'm so smart. Maybe it's just an added element of like the grotesque. Maybe it's just like something to do that's cool to look at and weird. Okay, let's look at the collection and talk about the collection. So the collection opened up with this blend of ruggedness and elegance with these floor-length leather coats. You have the drawstring that's reminiscent of spring 1999 and spring 1993, combining all these different contexts of wardrobe and dressing and life and the different roles that people have together, right? You're blending that casual drawstring with the elevated silhouette mixed with maybe some of the private life, like the leather fetish looking, even labor looking, kind of butcher adjacent, apron adjacent shapes. I think it's consistent with the fashion house's ability to juxtapose and layer meaning, eras, history, periods in fashion, like costume with the different roles that we play and why those are seen as two different things, and how that can create meaning, right? I think the House of Margiela is a lot about creating new meaning and kind of questioning the existing meanings that we have. I appreciate the House of Margiela's desacralization, like the fact that they remove the sacredness of kind of some of these fashion symbols, and they're not being too precious about them because everything is kind of conflated and blended together. Taking a look at look 3, which is like the apron look, it reminds me of the House Lotta aprons that we saw this season, spring 2026, and at Miu Miu. We have a strong labor story, meanwhile ain't nobody working. To me, it evokes the idea of, again, women's roles, getting dressed in real life, particularly working women. Looking at the roles that exist in different women's lives means analyzing the different contexts of dressing, how they cross over each other. Across the collection, in terms of uniformity, again, I'm really intrigued by the tuxedos because of how they correspond to the theme of uniformity. The couture show had these looks that kind of looked like camouflage, right? The blending of these like kind of murky green, floral looking, collaged, patchworked pieces. It reminded me of like camouflage, which felt like a military element, which obviously is a reference to like uniformity and thought and direction of power, etc., etc. And obviously the fashion house Margiela challenges tradition. So I thought that was an interesting element of the collection. And then in terms of some of the references, obviously I'm not going to go through every single look and just point out references. This is like a account about like theory and thinking, not just like identifying and memorizing. But I saw like the fall 1997 kind of reference. It opens on a look that combines like this minty color and then like kind of stark white, but the white is actually like patterning paper and it's turned into like a coat. The bright colors throughout honestly remind me of that collection. And then also fall 1998, you have the plasticization, marionettes, you have the dress forms with plastic around them. Throughout the collection, there are also these ideas of inanimacy versus animacy. Fall 1998, like I said, you have the plasticization done on the mannequins rather than on models. The previous collection, spring 1998, this one you have the workers from the atelier holding up the flat garments. Plasticization also reminds me of the idea of transparency, which I think the House of Margiela is also very interested in investigating and revealing. Like the process of design. That's why they do things like make the pattern paper into a suit or use the dress forms as a top, etc., etc. They're about like revealing the design process. And again, the entire fashion system. I know it seems repetitive. I'm trying to be as clear as possible on the part about transparency. I'm so deep. Also, it's like, I think what Margiela puts in front of us is like transparency for what, right? Confronting even the value of transparency or the ways that transparency is sold to us in the fashion industry. That's why I really like seeing like the plastic pieces and also contrasting the artificial versus the organic, right? It reminds us of the power of what we can create and what does not occur naturally, the power of creation, what we can do to inspire awe in each other during our time on earth, to create meaning out of what could sometimes feel meaningless, which is life. And it reminds us of the beauty of life, and because it's temporary, right? Life is only valuable and special and important because it's not forever. And I think that that's what dealing with the artificial versus the organic reminds us of. And it's also connected to time and permanence, right? Plastic doesn't decompose easily. I think a plastic bag takes like 20 years to decompose. Other plastics even longer. And I think it forces us to confront this idea of disposability, and especially as it relates to the fashion cycle and the fashion system, and trends. I just really like what it reminds me of. And then longevity and time. Can you reiterate on the same designs, or is that wrong? You know, it's a vessel. It's a vessel. Vessel. Time. I'm so deep. So that's what I thought about the show. I think my conclusion, essentially, I didn't really have a full thesis for this one, but is that Margiela's work reveals to me how we relate to others through getting dressed, and how meaning is shaped and established through clothing and symbols and the social and cultural aspects of fashion. And this season's show was a display of like contrasted symbols, and that's how they story told about that to me. And I think that the house deconstructs fashion symbols and makes them less sacred or less singular as well, which I think is really true to the house codes. What do you guys think about the collection? How do you think it connects to the House of Margiela's frameworks and tenets? So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching this one. I'll see you guys very soon. I love you, and I'm so thankful for you. So see ya.